My wife is a great cook. She
Mm,
is a fantastic cook. But when we think about like passions and talents, the cooking itself is the skill. Her passion is creating experiences for other people.
mm.
And what she does is she uses that lens again in multiple places. When it comes to cooking, when it comes to event planning, when it comes to family planning, that's the lens that makes her feel great.
Mm.
And in the process, she makes other people feel great.
Hello, and welcome to Lean Into You, a podcast to remind educators the best investment they can make today is in themselves. We're your hosts, Alex Farrell with Child Care Wages Tennessee,
and Wesley Mays with the Tennessee Child Care Resource and Referral Network.
and today we are super excited to have Rick Lozano on the podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit about passion, because we hear all the time about educators having a passion for working with kids. But as we all know, the day can slam into you. You can get lost into the grind of the work, and sometimes we start experiencing burnout. We start experiencing stress, a lot of the things that we've talked about on this show. And so we want to talk about what passion is and maybe reframe what passion can be.
I love this conversation because I think that Rick brought kind of a new perspective on not only having a passion that might be childcare, but taking the passions that you have outside of your work and incorporating them into your work life.
One of my favorite parts of this conversation was how Rick incorporated emotional intelligence, something that we've talked about before, in helping identify what are the emotions that give us life, that fill us up, and how can we incorporate those things in our everyday work.
We're very excited for you to join us with this conversation on passion with Rick Lozano.
Hey Rick, how are you?
I am doing well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. We were really excited to talk about passion and passion in general, because it's something we wanted to talk about on this podcast for a long time, because we hear in our field, in early childhood education, we hear educators talk about having a passion for working with children constantly.
Yeah.
But as we all know, people get burnt out, people get stressed, that passion starts to wane over time. And we wanted to kind of put this question to you, and we'll get to this more in depth later, of is that waning passion because people have a certain idea in their head of what they think passion means? So that's kind of a little bit of what we're going to get into today. But before we do that, would you just introduce yourself for people that don't know who you are, and then what are you doing now, and what does your work look like now?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast, and to everyone in the audience, hello, thank you. My name is Rick Lozano, and what I do, I am the founder of a company called Unlock and Amplify, and we are a talent and leadership development company. And the goal of everything that I do is to help people unlock and amplify their talent and potential. And my mission really comes down to this. I believe that we all have talent and potential that has yet to be realized. So what I do and the work that I do is help leaders and teams and individuals figure out what those things are and how to do more of it. I work as a facilitator. I do a lot of workshops. I also work as a keynote speaker. So I get to go around the country and elsewhere in Canada and England and beyond. And I love getting up in front of audiences and finding ways to help create that spark, that passion, if you will, to help people move to that next best place. I'm an author. I just released a book last month. The book is called Acoustic Leadership: Develop a Leadership Culture That Resonates.
Wow.
And it's my first book, and I'm really proud of the way that it turned out. And yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell everything that I get a chance to do. And I'm thrilled to do the work that I do. And I have a wife, 2 cats, and 2 kids, and live here in San Antonio, Texas. By the way, that's weird that I put it in that order. The cats came first. Maybe that says something about me.
I'm familiar with your work because you have actually done some speaking and leadership training for CCR&R, and that was just fantastic. And one of the things that you often do in your trainings is you pull out your guitar and you do a little singing. And I was just wondering if there's potential that you could do that on the podcast today.
So thank you. I never thought you'd ask. I've got this one. Look at this. I have a guitar hanging right here.
Oh man, you're so unprepared.
Happens to be plugged in, no less.
Out of nowhere.
So we'll talk about this here in a minute, but I sometimes bring music into the work that I do. I'm also a singer songwriter and musician, and this is I wrote a song introducing myself basically, and the context of it came down to this. I was doing a keynote presentation in Columbia, South Carolina, and after the presentation, one of the attendees came up to me, and this person was like, "Hey, so how do you become a keynote speaker and so on?" And I mentioned, well, there's no one right way, there's no one path, and everyone I know who's in this line of work completely got there in a different way. And so this person says, well, okay, well, what about your path? What was your path? How do I be like you? And I said, well, you need
No pressure.
You need to question your life choices. I don't recommend being like me. But anyway, I told this person, I told her the story of how I came to be a keynote speaker, so to speak. And at the end of it, she goes, that's funny. You should work that into your act. And I said, what do you mean? She said, you should write a song about it. You should write a song and call it How to Be Like Me. So ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what I did.
I wish I could say this is a world premiere of how to be like me, but
this is exactly how you do it. This
lean into you exclusive
process.
We're ready.
All right, here we go. So this, by the way, this is a total joke. I don't take myself that seriously, but let's have some fun. Here we go. So this is the true story. All right. Graduate from college with a useless degree. Moved to California to set myself free. Grow my hair long and join a crappy band, and that's how you be like me. Moved to Colorado with a girl who is a clown. I should probably give some context. She wasn't always a clown. She was studying clown. This probably doesn't need too context. Anyway, okay, we'll move on. So I was dating a clown. Again, what does this say about me? Moved to Colorado with a girl who is a clown. Break up because you're afraid to settle down. Move on back to Texas for a teaching degree, and that's how you be like me. Move back to Colorado for a woman that you met. Struggle for the bills because you don't have a job yet. Marry then divorce. See how easy this can be? That's how you be like me. Now here's where it gets complicated. All right. Quit teaching, move to banking, quit banking, back to teaching, quit teaching, back to banking, get a job teaching banking. Stay a corporate trainer because you love what you do. Work for a tech co, try something new. No more suits and ties on my body, you will see, and that's how you be like me. Find the love of your life, marriage, kids, let's celebrate. She thinks this song is stupid, but I think it's really great. Become a singing speaker who teaches how to lead, and that's how you be like me. That's right. That's how you be like me. Oh, that's how you be like me. The step-by-step process for how.
Bravo.
We've always wanted to. Hold on just a second. I've got to figure out these sounds. Just a second. No.
Oh, there we go.
Applause. We got a whole stadium here, folks.
I love it. Get them to do the wave and everything.
We've had these built-in sounds on our podcast board since day one, and I've never found a time to use it. But that's it.
Maybe to help facilitate that. But here's what's funny, and this is something I wanted to talk to your audience about today. The second part of that song, or excuse me, of that story. So yes, so this lady comes up to me, and yes, so I wrote a song about it. It's a big joke. But something happened before then. When she came up and she said that she had seen me speak the year before, she said, by the way, I saw you speak the year before, and you said something that really made a difference. I said, really, what was it? And she went on to tell me the story of how something I said inspired her to follow one of her passions. And she told me the story about how in the last year, since I last saw her, she went on to follow this project that she had signed, or excuse me, to continue this project that she had sidelined forever. And her project was basically a documentary film about the indigenous population native to that part of South Carolina. So she made a movie.
Oh,
and
wow.
she went on to say, yeah, I wouldn't have done it without you. I was like, really? I had no idea. And this is the thing that I think is really important for us as we begin this conversation. We influence people and we don't even know it.
Yeah.
We make a difference in people's lives all the time, and we don't even know it. And much like me, here I am playing this silly song and whatever. And this lady was the one who inspired that, but it came from a place because something I did mattered to her.
Right.
And as we begin to talk about passions, one of the things that I want to do is I want to help people know they matter. I want to help people realize that they have that influence on other people and that their sheer existence means something. So that's just a little bit of context around that idea there.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say that. Like, do you think people knowing that they matter and have something valuable they are valuable inherently and also have something valuable to give, like, is that the bedrock for like understanding your passion?
I think it can definitely help. And I'll give you an example. Again, we all influence people and we don't even know it. I had a leader who about 8 years ago, so there's more to that keynote speaker story. Here's what actually happened. About 8 years ago was when I transformed my career and started working more as a keynote speaker, as an independent consultant and whatnot. And it happened because somebody saw something in me that I didn't see. And I tell the story in my book, and it's actually kind of entertaining. But the short version of it is this. Leader one day says, "Hey, Rick, you're great at 3 things." I said, "Really? That's it?" And he said, "Yes, 3 things. That's what you're good at. You're good at training, you're good at speaking, and you're good at music. Do all of those 3 things." I said, "Well, I've got some gigs coming up next week." He said, No. Do those things at work. Find a way to make all 3 of those things work together." And that changed my entire career. Suddenly I started thinking like a musician at work. I started literally bringing my guitar to the work that I do, and everything changed. And it was that insight. It was that idea from this other person who said, "Hey, the work that you do matters, and here's something that you don't see in yourself that you have the potential to do and be." And it changed my life.
Yeah. Wow.
And now my whole goal is, hey, I want to put that forward. I want to help other people find those things for themselves, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
Sure.
So this is kind of a 2-part question. Before we go any further, 1, I would like to know, how do you define passion? And then 2, what you had said, like, hey, you were doing music outside of work. You found a way to integrate that into your work. Sometimes we'll have passions, and we may get into this a little bit later. We'll have passions that don't transfer to the work or to the classroom, for instance, for our educators. So how do you kind of navigate that kind of thing when you're passionate about something that doesn't translate? So, but first, how do you define passion personally?
Yeah, that is a great question. And if you were to go Google it right now, if you were to go to dictionary.com or something, the very first thing that you would see is passion is essentially any powerful or compelling emotion. That's what passion is. Passion is emotion. And as we know, there's all different shades of emotion.
Yeah.
When it comes to passions at work, what we need to also remember is there's passions that we create, emotions that we create. So for example, you do something good, you feel the emotion of pride. I created that. I'm proud of what I did. I'm playing a video game and I level up. I created an emotion of pride. On the other hand of it, there's emotions that are sort of given to us by our surroundings, by our circumstances, right? So if we create a culture, for example, of appreciation, and people show up every single day knowing that they are appreciated, they're feeling this emotion coming from an external source. Now, I bring this up because if we're talking about passion in the workplace, there's 2 responsibilities here. There's a responsibility on an intrinsic level for me to create that passion to a certain degree. And then as a culture, and we'll get into this a little bit more, as a culture, we are responsible in so many ways for how people feel at work, for how they experience work. And passion is, we've heard this, a lot. People say, follow your passion, and everything will change. And I think that works for some people. Right. I think that some people, they just have this thing. They've always had it. They've always done it, and it just works for them. But I don't think that's the same for everybody.
Right.
In my case, hey, my passions happen to include guitar. I love playing music. It makes me feel good. And I was fortunate to be able to do that in the work that I do, but not everyone gets that opportunity. Right. So how do we create those emotions on an intrinsic level? And how do we cultivate those positive passions from an organizational level? So think about this, for example. If you can follow your passions and that leads to something fantastic, awesome. That's great. You're doing fine. You're ahead of the game. But people always, the other thing I always hear as well as people say, well, I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know what I should do. I mean, yes, I
Right.
love working as an educator, for example, but I don't know what else there is. And for me, on that intrinsic level, passion is the result of action.
Right.
You are passionate about something, you experience an emotion because you did something. You created something, you built something, you changed something. I'll give you an example. My wife and I were scuba divers. And this wasn't something that we had in our lives until about 4 years ago. We just decided this is something we want to do. And so we literally dove in, pun intended. We got certified to become scuba divers. We got our advanced open water certification. And by the way, when it comes to something like this, you're either all in or you're not in.
Sure.
So at that point in time, we made a choice and we said, we're all in. So we bought our own scuba gear. And by the way, anyone at a dive shop will tell you the people that buy their own gear are the ones who actually scuba dive for life.
Yeah.
And that became us. And so here we are 4 years later, we have almost 200 dives under our belt. We've dove everywhere, all over the place. And it's a passion. We love it. But here's the thing, again, passion is the result of action. We had to do something. We had to put those wheels in motion. And now it's a huge part of our life.
Sure.
And I see this again because oftentimes people think about passion and they limit it to either their personal life or their work life.
Yeah.
And to the point about, the work that everyone here does, yeah, I can imagine it's hard work. I can imagine having this passion for children and being an educator. And when you get stuck in the grind, yeah, your passion might start to wane. So the question is, what can we implement to sort of bolster those passions and or create new ones,
Right.
both inside and outside of work? Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, I mean, I think you gave a fantastic example of something working for you. Like you had this passion that was guitar, right? And you had the opportunity to bring that into the workplace. What about something like scuba diving, right? Like what are the lessons that you can learn from that passion that you're able to bring to the table in your work, right? Because you were able to do that. I mean, I think that kind of is, for most people, what they're going to experience. I have my passion, I have my hobbies outside of work, and for you that is scuba diving, but that doesn't necessarily immediately translate. How do you look at something like that?
That's a great question. And one of the mistakes that I personally made was I had this experience. I had this revelation, right? I had this epiphany and oh man, I was in love with it. And so I began preaching it. And I told everyone, here's what you got to do and combine your passions and bring your guitar to work. And what I quickly realized was that was my experience.
Sure. Yeah.
And just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for anybody else. And, at the time I truly believed in it and I still do. And we'll talk about what I think it looks like in a minute. But I remember I was doing a keynote presentation a while back and I was saying those things like combine your passions, bring these things to work. And this is a true story. I had a guy in the audience and he's a friend of mine now, but at the time I didn't know who he was. And he raises his hand and I said, yeah. And he goes, what if stripping is my passion? I can't do that at work, can I? And you could almost hear this little snicker like, ha, ha, ha. And I was like, you jerk. Oh, there's always that one guy. But you know what? He was absolutely right. I mean, if stripping was your passion, no, that's not something you can do at work. And it was funny because that made me sort of re-examine what I was trying to say. And what I realized was, similar to Wesley, your point about scuba diving, what we can do is we can curate this list of experiences and borrow from them as a lens through which to create those emotions, to create those passions. And I'll give you an example, and it happens to do with dancing. I have a friend who is a world-class MC. She is just fantastic at what she does, and she does a lot of on-camera work. And she's moving into the keynote space. So she wants to work on deliver keynote presentations. And she also happens to be a dancer. And we talked about, okay, like in my case, okay, I am a musician. I was able to bring it to work. And she didn't feel comfortable bringing dancing to the work that she did. And I said, that's fine. You don't have to. But what about that lens? Let's think about what dancers do. Let's think about the world that they live in. There's balance. and there's precision, and there's technique, and then there's this grace, right? There's this grace even while they're falling, and they're able to somehow rebound, and it's just beautiful. And I was like, what about adopting that mindset? Mm-hmm. What can we steal? What can we do over here from a passion technique perspective and apply it to the work over here? Let's use Wesley. What is something you're passionate about, for example?
Yeah, I would say, put me on the spot here, but I would say that one thing, if you know anything about me, I love growing things. I love I have 30 plus houseplants in my apartment. My dream is to have land where I can cultivate, and it's just something I love doing. I get a lot out of, I think, nurturing something.
Right. And if we think about that as a source of inspiration, and again, if we're equating passion with emotion, it's about creating those emotions that are meaningful to us. So from your perspective, if we could borrow from that sort of, I don't know, that greenhouse lens, if you will, right? You're putting things into the world and you're helping them grow. Look at what you're doing with this podcast, for example. You're growing your audience. You're building your following. You're also spreading a message that can help other people grow. You're being a caregiver, you're nurturing, and you're planting seeds that one day are going to grow into something, and you probably aren't ever going to know you had that impact, like we talked about earlier, but you're doing it. And I bring that up to say that's a lens that we could borrow. And once I begin looking at the world through that lens, at that point, I'm going to feel different about the work that I do. When I think back, by the way, about what the biggest difference was when I started bringing my guitar to work, it wasn't because I was playing music. It's because I was thinking like a musician. I was adopting that lens, and being able to view the world through that lens connected me in a way that I didn't know was possible. It created that passion.
Yeah. This brings me back to when we, like way back when, I think our third or fourth episode, we talked to the Signal Center's CEO, Donna McConico, and we asked her what her idea of self-care is. And she said, a lot of people have a work-life, home-life balance. For me, wellness looks like my life being well integrated. So that's a lot of what I hear from you of like, okay, it's, we talk about, our work life, 9 to 5, or many times in childcare, 6:30 to 6:30, or, whatever it is. And then we go home, and then we have the music that we listen to, the people that we hang out with, the ways in which we facilitate community, cooking, those types of things, those hobbies. This is such a perfect way of like, no, you can't make a spaghetti bolognese for your kids in your classroom. But I love this idea of taking the, for instance, our reverence for maybe ingredients or freshness, creativity in the kitchen, and using that as like a lens of like, hey, how do you incorporate that and integrate this work life and home life? I love this idea because I think of even my background, like I come from a very like interdisciplinary background of like, how do we take two things that on the surface are not really related and use one as a way to view the other in order to receive like fresh insight?
You made me think of two things when you said that. And the first, and one of the things that I talk about in one of my keynotes, there's one that I do called Unlock and Amplify. And something about what you said, combining the things that are already around you, sometimes that's where the magic is. We've got access to all of these things that we either do or that we're talented at or that are just surrounding us. And sometimes it's just the creative reimagination of how these things work together that means everything, right? The other thing that you said that made me think of, you made me think of my wife. My wife is a great cook. She is a fantastic cook. But when we think about like passions and talents, the cooking itself is the skill. Her passion is creating experiences for other people. And she does it everywhere. She is an incredible event planner. For example, my book launch was last month, and it was epic because she put all of these things into place that I never would have thought of. So she's got this talent for creating experiences. And what she does is she uses that lens again in multiple places. When it comes to cooking, when it comes to event planning, when it comes to family planning, that's the lens that makes her feel great. And in the process, she makes other people feel great.
Yeah.
So it's that lens that's really that driver there.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you bring that up. And maybe you could help provide some prompts for some of our listeners, what are some ways that our educators who have identified, yeah, I'm passionate about working with kids, to distill that down into maybe some more specific pieces of that? Because I think that is the start of that conversation of when the grind of the job hits.
Sure.
We need something to fall back on.
Sure.
You know.
Right.
But how do you educators start to lead that conversation with themselves?
Obviously, I think the answer is going to be different for every single person. I think it's helpful to remember that that is one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
We are complex individuals, and I don't think most of us find our passions in only one particular place. I mean, some people do, but that's not all there is to it. And the truth of the matter is life is complicated. And there's going to be days where, let's be honest, work's going to suck. And we're not going to be getting the things that we need. And the question is, where can we find those things where we can put things into motion, where we can create those actions like we talked about, right? Passion is the result of action sometimes. What actions can we take? Let me give you another thought on this. A while ago, I was facilitating a session on resilience. And I realized that, again, we're talking about emotions here. We're talking about emotions, and emotions are complicated. So I've got a framework that I use, and I think your audience, I think as educators, this can be really helpful. And I call it the triple AF model. It's AAAF. And the 4 steps to the model are this. The first one is, awareness, acceptance, attention, and forward motion. So let's break this down. Awareness. I think sometimes we go, I'm feeling today. I'm not feeling my passion. I'm not feeling it. Work is work, and that sucks. It used to be I showed up and I was excited about work, and now it's work.
Right.
So there's an emotion level there, whether you call it lethargy or disengagement. But here's the thing about emotions. Emotions are complex because there's also an underlying emotion there that was potentially the root cause. And we can't go anywhere unless we realize the underlying emotions. Let me give you an example. Traffic. You're driving, you're in your car, somebody cuts you off. Ooh, what emotion springs itself to the surface?
Joy,
Anger.
mostly joy.
Anger.
And
Hatred.
understanding, compassion.
And by the way, that emotion leads to the action, which is usually a finger of choice in the air, right? Yeah. So something happens and this emotion is created. But here's the thing. That wasn't the original emotion that caused it. You may feel anger. You may feel really ticked off because this person did this to you. But you feel angry because there was something else, an emotional thing that happened before that, and it was fear. You felt scared. You were in danger. You were put in danger. And so it's really helpful to understand that that emotional reaction was caused from fear.
Yeah.
And I bring this up because, again, I think on a work level, when we think about passion, when we think about engagement, sometimes what we're feeling is almost a symptom of something else that caused it. So what is that root emotion? In the workplace, you know what oftentimes it is? It's that feeling of being undervalued, or feeling powerlessness, or feeling lack of direction. I don't know what the exact emotional word is, but it's important because, again, I can solve for my frustration, but if I don't do something about that powerlessness, I'm not going to be able to make any sort of significant changes that are going to help me find my way.
Right.
So let's go back. So there's awareness, right?
Yeah.
We feel all these things. Sometimes we don't even know it. A simple exercise for all of us is to name our emotions.
Yeah.
I am feeling scared.
Yeah.
I am feeling overwhelmed. And once I can really narrow those root emotions down, then I can move to the next step. The next step is acceptance. And it's as simple as, it's exactly what it sounds like. Hey, you're feeling it. Validate that emotion.
Right.
It's real. And oh, by the way, validate that emotion in others. You think about empathy, right? People just need to know that, hey, you are frustrated. It's a real emotion. It's a real thing. And oh, by the way, I learned this scuba diving. You ever tried to tell somebody, hey, there's nothing to worry about? Have you ever done that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever done that to you? Oh no, you don't need to feel frustrated. You don't need to feel. Didn't it help when they did that?
No.
No. And it's so funny. I remember a while back. And by the way, scuba diving, again, my wife and I, we love it now. It was much easier for me than it was for my wife.
Mm.
My wife was the type of person where even when we were swimming, she would not put her head below water. She just didn't like that feeling.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing that she's a scuba diver at all. But what happened with us is, she would be at the surface, and man, we were 30 dives into it. And yet still she would have this anxiety, this apprehension right as we were about to go below the surface. And I caught myself going, hey, there's nothing to worry about. Don't worry about it. You've done this plenty of times. There's nothing to worry about. And then I thought how ludicrous that statement is. Right. We're literally going under the water. There's lots of ways to die. Yeah. So if you're feeling that emotion, you are entitled to that emotion.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. And my job is to let you go through your process.
Yeah.
And it's funny because that's one of the things that we did is we literally call it the process. And it doesn't happen that much these days, but the process was when the anxiety happens, just stop. Just stop. No need to go underwater yet. It's going to work itself through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She goes through her process. She takes a couple of minutes and then we move on. And I think that that's what's happening there. We're validating the emotion. So there's that awareness of what's going on. And then there's that acceptance. It's a real emotion. Give it the attention it deserves.
Right.
But the trick is not any more than that.
Yeah.
Give that emotion the attention it needs, and that's it. So from there, we go to attention. It is awareness, acceptance, attention. And the big question here, and by the way, this is where we start to gain some control because we ask ourselves this question, where am I putting my attention? What am I focusing on? Because once we realize that we're focusing on one thing versus the other, we realize we have choices in it. Not with everything, but with a lot of things. Suddenly I realize I can put my attention somewhere else.
Sure.
Yeah. And the last part is forward motion. What am I going to do? What choices am I going to make that are going to help me move forward in a positive way? And by the way, I'm not immune to this. Nobody is.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody is. And even people who consider themselves emotional intelligence experts, maybe they are, but everyone goes through this. And I'll give you a very clear example of what this looked like for me and the choices that I had to make to reignite my passion. The COVID era has been tough. We all know this. The COVID era has been tough. We've been forced to face things that we've never seen before. Our realities completely changed. But you know what? For me, it started way before that. The last 4 years have really been a maelstrom of emotion and, world events and things going on and divisions in America and the world. I found myself, here I am, this motivational speaker kind of dude, and I wasn't feeling very motivated.
Yeah.
I was standing up in front of audiences and yes, it made me feel good to help other people. But every now and then I looked at myself and I said, gosh, I'm not feeling it.
Right.
I have bad days just like everybody else. And you know what I realized? I went through this process on my own. It's actually how I created the process. That first part was that awareness. And I realized that, yes, I was feeling overwhelmed. Yes, I was feeling frustrated. But the real root driver for me was helplessness. I felt like I couldn't do anything about it. I felt like no matter how many times I stood up in front of audiences, and even if it was a really good keynote presentation, I was helpless to solve the bigger things that were going on in the world. So there was that helplessness. So from an acceptance level, I had to do just that, going, hey, that's what I'm feeling. It's real, it's there. But now where am I putting my attention? And much like a lot of other people, I realized that have you guys heard that term doom scrolling?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. I was doing it too.
There.
Whether it be Twitter or Facebook or wherever, I was contributing to this feeling of overwhelm. Again, my attention was being put on those things that were heightening those negative emotions. Sure. And I realized it. So I asked myself this question, where am I putting my attention? What can I do? And, at this point, there's always this balance, right? Because I don't want to be a disconnected, uninformed individual. I want to be a good, socially responsible citizen. I want to be aware of what's happening in the world. but I also need to realize that it's not all on my shoulders.
Right.
And so I made a very conscious decision, and this is where we get to that forward motion place. I put myself on a digital diet. I said, I'm going to do less of that. I'm going to spend less of my attention on this. And if I'm feeling helpless, because that's what I was feeling helpless, what actions can I take to make me feel like I'm helping? And obviously in the work that I do, that's something I get to do anyway, but I made a conscious choice. And one of the things that I'm doing these days is I'm trying to tell people every single day the impact that they're having on me. I'm trying to give people or express that gratitude and that thankfulness. That's something that I can do. That's a forward motion thing that can help me get reconnected to my passion, get reconnected to those positive emotions just by telling other people, here's something that you did that meant something to me.
Yeah.
Here's something you're really great at, and here's why people love you for it. And these simple little acts, it's not exactly gratitude, it's expressing gratitude. That action for me helps me get back to that place where I begin to feel connected to the work I do again, where I begin to feel passionate again. So if we're talking about educators in your environment, what choices do we have? Where are we spending our attention? And if I'm not getting it from the grind, because the grind is real, it's there.
Right.
What choices and actions can I take? We've talked about on a personal level being responsible and making choices, right? And there's only, there's that element of intrinsic sort of on my level, the things that I can do to create passion, connect passion, et cetera. I know you both are also really big on organizational culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other part of this equation where there's this extrinsic factor that can help people feel connected to the work they do, whether it's appreciation or recognition. It's also people being consistently reminded of why the work they do matters. Let me ask you this question. In a medical environment, in a hospital environment, who saves lives? General question. When you're asked that question, what do people usually say?
Generally doctors, probably. That's what people would say.
Doctors,
Nurses,
some people say nurses, etc. And Kaiser Permanente did something really, really amazing. So Kaiser Permanente is a healthcare organization. What they did was they created this program called I Saved a Life. And what we know from data is early detection is the single biggest thing anyone can do to save lives. So what Kaiser Permanente did was they realized that their doctors, their nurses, they are seeing patients, let's just throw a random number, like 20% less than the people who are on the front lines, the people who are on the phones, the people who are handling the billing, the receptionists in the office place. And what they did was they realized that every single one of those touch points was an opportunity to literally save a life, because that person's suggestions to get early screenings, mammograms, those kinds of tests, for example, those kinds of things can literally save lives. So what they did was they created this thing called the I Saved a Life program. And they gave everybody training on how to recommend early detection sort of screenings, that kind of thing. And the results were fantastic. The first, let's say, 6-month period, out of the 1,200 diagnoses that came back positive, meaning there was a medical issue, more than 50% of those things came from the frontline staff.
Wow.
That's crazy.
The receptionist, the person working the phone. And what they did was they turned right back around and they said to everyone in their organization, you saved a life. Your job isn't just scheduling appointments. Your job is saving lives. And again, I think that this is important, because when these people show up to work every day, not only are they doing their quote unquote job, they're reminded that they can literally save a life with the things that they do.
Sure.
And I think that's important, because from an organizational level, whether it's education, early childhood education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's anything, it's how do we remind people that the work they do matters?
Yeah.
And I think to this whole conversation about passion, so often we lose that passion because we forget. And I think that simple act of reminding people makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I love that point, and it goes back to what you were saying before. I think when we were talking about the awareness stage in the resiliency model that you brought up, one of the things that leads to people being burnt out is being undervalued.
Yep.
And this solves that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Rick, this has been a really amazing conversation. I think
Thank you.
you've brought a lot of insight into ways that we can reframe what passion means to us,
Right.
ways that we can look at when we say we've got a passion for fill in the blank. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? Can we use kind of these tools of emotional intelligence to go up the river, up the stream a little bit to figure out, okay, what's the DNA? What's the most basic part of the thing that drives me? We usually like to sign off our episodes with our guests, giving a little word of encouragement to our educators out there.
First of all, thank you for the work that you do. Just thank you. As educators, you as podcast host, Alex West, thank you for the work that you do, bringing this message and this positivity to people's lives. We need it. If I was to give any words of encouragement, the first, again, is to not only remember that you matter, but take action on telling other people that they matter. Take that simple step to recognize the people around you, in your organization, in your life. I think the other thing to remember is that sometimes we need to unplug to reconnect. Take the time, create the space, get away from those things that are causing you grief, try on different perspectives. You know, we talked about the painter and the dancer and all those things. Look at the world through that different lens from time to time, and you'll be amazed at what you see. I think one of the things that has also been helpful personally for me is when I see other people elevating other people, that inspires me, because I think that we as human beings, when we help other people be better in any capacity, I think that's where we're going to feel the greatest joy.
Yeah.
I think that things, and you know, we start off, a lot of us in our careers, and it's about me. It's about what I can get and what I can build and how much money I can make, and me. And I think that's great. I'm not dismissing that. It's important to get those things for yourself to create a stable life. But I think from a passion perspective, those things are short-lived. And I think the longer term thing, and what a lot of people realize, is when they start to give back, when they start to put the focus on other people, that is just the greatest sense of joy I think most of us can ever achieve. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to be in front of you and your audience. And again, thank you all for the work that you do. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you, Rick Lozano. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, and we hope you have a fantastic week.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. This podcast is funded through a grant with the Tennessee Department of Human Services and Signal Centers. Signal Centers is a nonprofit in Chattanooga, Tennessee, whose mission is to strengthen children, adults, and families through services focusing on disabilities, early childhood education, and self-sufficiency.
If you would like to leave a review, a comment, or have a suggestion for a future episode, please do so on our Instagram account, @LeanIntoYouPod. That's one word, @LeanIntoYouPod. Follow us on Instagram for weekly self-care tips, clips from our episodes, and graphic takeaways from many of the talking points from our conversations. Thanks again for listening to the Lean Into You podcast, and we hope you have a fantastic week.